Hello and welcome back. This time we will be talking about the new features in Houdini 18 in terms of fracturing. So I have here a very simple scene that I have designed. So we're going to start fracturing this diamond shape. And if you see, I only have a light table just in case you want to render the exercise. I have a base for the diamond shape and the diamond itself. I also have placed a camera and a few lights, again just in case you want to try and render it by yourself. That's fine. In the meantime, I will close this backdrop. I will dive into the diamond geometry and I will show you it's a very simple setup. I just have a subnetwork with the actual modeling I did, then a transform to place it on top of this base, and a null. As usual, I use a null to create an output. And here I have placed a few of the new nodes that we're going to be talking about. Well, actually the RBD material fracture is not new. We have worked already with that, but it has a few enhancements as of Houdini 18. And these three new nodes, they are completely new to this new version, and we will be talking about them in a few minutes. So let's start by connecting the RBD material fracture node. And you will notice here, so if I zoom into the fourth input, it says extra Voronoi point, which it had already. But now to the right, it says cutter geometry. So I'm speaking about this small text that appears. So this is something new, and of course I will be talking about it. So let's create the connection. Of course, I think we will create our own scatter points, but just remember the RBD material fracture by default can already fracture the geometry. So let me hide the other objects. I will hide other objects in the viewport just to make clear the point and to make sure that you understand what I'm talking about. And now I will connect this new node that's called RBD exploded view. Actually, I will do it from scratch. So type the tab key and type RBD exploded view. So we can connect the RBD material fracture to the new node. And notice by default, it will only connect one single port, and the RBD exploded view has 3 ports. What I recommend you to do is connect all 3, and you can do that in several ways. Let me actually create this node again. So select the RBD material fracture node and start typing RBD exploded view, and you can press Shift Enter. This will connect all 3 ports at once. Another thing that I like to do, I will disconnect them all. So I'll press Y and drag on the connections to disconnect them. Another thing that you can do is click on the first port of your RBD material fracture and then shift click on the rest of the ports and then click on the first connection of the RBD exploded view. And this is something you can do with all these new nodes that have multiple ports and are linked together. So by default, you will notice nothing new really. This appears to be exactly the same as the exploded view that we had before. But let me select the node to see its options. And notice by default, it says show proxy geometry. So let's go back to the RBD material fracture and let's add some detail. So I will click on edge detail. I will increase the height just to make this more evident. And now you can see clearly that here this white wireframe, it's coming from the RBD exploded view, is showing us the proxy geometry that has been generated by the RBD material fracture node. So remember, all these new nodes are created to work together with this new rigid body dynamics workflow. Another very interesting thing that you can do is check on the show constraints. And this will show all the constraints, all the connections that have been created, again, within the RBD material fracture node. So it is clear, for example, the amount of connections that you have, or where the connections are stronger or weaker. So let's click on the visualize property and select constraint strength, for example. And notice you will have a range going from blue to red. So blue would be a value of 2000. That would be the minimum strength of these connections, of these constraints. And the red would be the maximum strength of almost 9000. So also the RBD material fracture creates some variation on the strengths connection, and you can see it very clearly here. For example, on the top right you see the blue color, and more towards the bottom you see the red. Also, if you had, for example, constraint stiffness or constraint angular stiffness, you could visualize it here. For now it's unspecified, but just in case you had those attributes, you could visualize them here. Let's again go to the visualize properties, and this time let's select the pieces option. So this may be familiar to you. With the visualize pieces option, you'll have a random color for each of the pieces on the fracture. So this also can be very useful. And finally, you can show the actual convex hulls that will be created when simulating. So let me turn off the constraints and the proxy geo. And if you click on the show convex hulls, this would be the convex hull created for the actual simulation. So this is very useful to see here directly, even before you start simulating. Finally, a nice, interesting option that we have here is a random rotate. This will allow you to rotate the pieces in case you want to see, for example, the interior faces of one of the pieces, or just to have a better sense of the contours and the shapes. And of course, we also have the uniform scale. That's the common attribute on the exploded view. So this is for the RBD exploded view node. It may look like a simple addition, but I'm sure that you will be using it every single time you're creating fracturing for your destruction.